What is truth, and why does it matter? Is truth not the basis on which we judge reality, coexist peacefully, justly? Power of the minority over a majority with a foundation based on lies will lead to ruin. Healing and unity cannot be achieved when this is the case. Only division. The people of Canada need to understand what is happening in Powell River and why.
The announcement that the remains of 215 children had been found in the old apple orchard next to the Kamloops Indian Residential School had a profound impact on Canada and the world. The town of Powell River was no exception, as the revelation prompted the demand by the Tla'amin Nation to change the town's name. Here in this coastal community, what is perceived as just a minor change has much more significant implications because it gets to the heart of the ability to believe true things. Furthermore, the unmarked graves story has been used as a weapon to fast-track the integration of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, into the Canadian legal system, which has the potential to undermine the rule of law and democratic processes more generally. But the claims about Kamloops are now in dispute because of the investigations of Blacklock's reporter and an intrepid group of academics, lawyers, and journalists. What is being exposed is that the unmarked graves claims are being initiated by an entity called the Aboriginal Industry, a self-serving group of lawyers and consultants that manufacture grievances to divert funding away from the marginalized Indigenous population. I believe that I have a responsibility as an academic to alert the public about this manipulation and try to uncover the truth. All people, including the Indigenous population, deserve the truth because it is on this basis that we can learn to live peacefully and cooperatively with one another.
So at this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and honored speaker, Dr. Francis Widdowson.
This evening, what I wanted to do is I wanted to, first of all, explain why I've come to Powell River. My main concern is with pursuing the truth, trying to understand the nature of reality as it is, not as what we would like it to be.
Francis Widdowson, a professor of Mount Royal University in Calgary, was wrongfully terminated for satirizing woke ideology, which she defines as totalitarian identity politics. At York University, under the supervision of the famous socialist Leo Panitch, Widdowson received her doctorate in political science. In the 1990s, she worked for the government in the Northwest Territories as a policy analyst, and there she began examining Indigenous issues. It was during this time that she met Albert Howard, a consultant for Aboriginal groups. Together, they worked on critically analyzing the government's Aboriginal traditional knowledge policy. Through their work on the subject, they discovered the role played by what they called the Aboriginal industry in driving the Aboriginal policy. This entity, according to Widdowson and Howard, was a self-serving group of largely non-Aboriginal lawyers and consultants who created grievances to divert funding away from much-needed services in Aboriginal communities. Living among the northern town of Yellowknife, Widdowson and Howard witnessed how Aboriginal leadership, while not part of the Aboriginal industry itself, were being bought off through their participation in these legal and bureaucratic processes. After finishing her doctorate, Widdowson became a professor at Mount Royal University in 2008. And it was in this year with Albert Howard that they published Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry, The Deception Behind Indigenous Cultural Preservation. Widdowson and Howard's goal? To help marginalized communities and expose the waste and deception that was taking place. Her latest work, A Contribution to Grave Error, outlines the deception of the Aboriginal industry and how it relates to the 215 mass grave announcement in Kamloops, an announcement that has had wide-reaching implications to Canadian law and how the Canadian public perceived the truth. And this is why she has come to, of all places, Powell River on BC's coast, It is here that an important part of a deceptive story of mass graves is manifesting itself, driven by the Aboriginal industry. The concept of truth, for some, is not an ideal that is applied equally to all. When posed with the question of, does truth matter? Some Powell River residents believe operating on falsehoods is justifiable.
I think that to dictate something like this by a black and white concept of truth and true or false is not the issue.
So would that be kind of a different standard for the rest of people in society to be, I suppose, to have to base their lives and their actions off of truth, but there's another group of people that have a different subset of rules?
I think that as long as there is this very significant class division between the white population and the Indigenous population, why should there be this one set of rules? Like, it seems false to, again, to the black and white, right? It seems reductive to try and have one set of rules for people that live in incredibly different conditions and worlds in the same place.
Should Indian bands in Canada, who are already subsidized to the tune of billions of dollars a year, not have the responsibility to act on the foundation of truth? What has led members of the public to think in this way?
We don't have any evidence for remains of children at that site, and we don't have any records of a parent saying that their child never came home from the residential school. So therefore, if there are 200 remains in that apple orchard, who would those children be? And how did the band know that children as young as 3 years old were buried in the Kamloops apple orchard? Excavations, Sarah Bollier did say the only way that we can determine whether there are remains is through excavations.
Sarah Bollier, assistant professor at the University of the Fraser Valley. In May 2021, she was hired by the Kamloops Indian Band as GPR consultant, paid for by a grant from the Canadian Heritage Financial Support Program, totaling in $40,000. On July 15, 2021, she made remarks about her GPR findings, wherein she states they located probable burials.
The following slides, I will call the targets of interest probable burials, as they demonstrate multiple GPR characteristics of burials. But only forensic investigation with excavation will be able to conclusively determine this.
An important aspect of Bollier's very limited presentation of the data is her failure to address the septic field and the location of their scans. As we can see here, the septic tiles run from the school down to the apple orchard, where the GPR scans took place. Septic drainage is trenched in below frost line down to a depth of nearly 1 meter, exactly the depth that her GPR scans show. In the report done by residentialschoolrecords.com, they say, it seems clear that Dr. Bollier failed to do necessary archival research before conducting her GPR work, and that in particular, she was unaware of the 1926 report by E.H. Treadcroft and the 1937 report by W.C. Warren concerning sewage disposal systems at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. In spite of the band now knowing the septic field was scanned, they are still putting forth the claim that the anomalies are remains of children, backed by Sarah Bollier, the GPR consultant. And back in Powell River, when Valentina was presented with the fact that no excavations had taken place, despite the Kamloops Indian Band receiving $12.1 million to use for that purpose, believed that dishonesty and fraud were just part of the process in reaching a better future.
I feel like even if it's based in emotional reasoning and some sort of non-truths and people's personal plans to get money out of the government or whatever, it's not really something that concerns or upsets me. I think there's going to be a natural mess to cleaning up this kind of process. So as far as this band getting money, even if somebody's using it for, personal gain, I don't know. It's not something that I'm terribly occupied or upset about.
So if we're interested in truth, in pursuing truth, we should be, the media should be asking questions about what this number actually represents. And I don't think really there's been any stories which have examined this in any detail. The words missing children, you hear a lot. When we make decisions, we have to make sure that those decisions are based upon facts and not upon falsehoods or misleading information.
These numbers are based off of ground-penetrating radar scans that bands across Canada have done, and the public has been led to believe that the number is a tally of buried children. But what people don't know is that this total consists of graves from cemeteries long abandoned by communities, where grave markers have deteriorated. One such graveyard is located near Cowessess Indian Band, where they detected 751 hits with ground-penetrating radar 1 month after the Kamloops discovery.
As of yesterday, we have hit 751 unmarked graves.
This was a community cemetery where Catholic Church parishioners were also buried and marked with wooden crosses, which have deteriorated with the passage of time. In spite of it being known that this was an untended cemetery where both Indigenous and non-Indigenous were buried, Prime Minister Trudeau knelt with a teddy bear on the site, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh announced that this was evidence of genocide. A cemetery is also located on the Sleaman Reserve outside of Powell River. Many graves here were unmaintained and lacked markers for years until September 2020, when the band decided to do a GPR scan, and 200 observable and inferred burial sites were identified and announced a year later. The band then built hundreds of crosses to be placed on the surveyed area. These crosses provided no clue as to the identities that lay beneath. One wonders whether the 211 number here, like the 751 anomalies in Cowessess Indian Band, are included in the sign purporting to remember 10,068 missing children. A significant issue as it relates to the alleged graves of children at residential schools is the technology being used to assert the Indian Band's claims of murdered children, which by the nature of this technology is not capable of determining whether or not anomalous hits are human remains.
After scanning the ground for 4 days, the team processes the data and stitches it together in 3D to see if the resulting images show any signs of children's remains.
People are skeptical of this number because almost no excavations have been done, and the few that have been excavated have turned up no bodies of children.
From 4.5 to 7.5, there's just a lot of stuff going on.
There, yeah.
This is Terence Clark, professor at the University of Saskatchewan, and is acting as GPR consultant on several different band grounds, scanning for what they claim are remains of children.
There's just a lot of stuff going on.
There, yeah.
This is the type of shape that we have found. The color pattern, you can almost imagine a child lying on its side in that pit.
The Aboriginal industry, made up of lawyers and consultants, are maintaining the narrative of missing children, and the media is supporting this message by failing to report on this deception.
There's no other sort of natural phenomenon to explain why you'd have this oval pit underneath the surface.
A geophysicist in Canada who fears reprisal for speaking out and is remaining anonymous has seen the story that was published by New York Times and has serious doubts about the claims Terence Clark is making here.
It shows the value of what we're doing.
He states, Clark is using 450 megahertz GPR antennas to search for graves in clay soil. Clay is electrically conductive and attenuate electromagnetic energy, so depths of signal penetration will be severely limited in this part of Saskatchewan. It is doubtful they are seeing real subsurface signal reflections below 30 centimeters. He says, Clark gives away his lack of experience by stating,
"There's no other sort of natural phenomenon to explain why you'd have this oval pit underneath the surface. And then the fact that there are 8 to 10 or 12, all of those things together."
It's about as certain as we can get, I would say.
Yeah.
examples of natural phenomenon, he goes on, that can explain their data include disturbed soils, animal burrows, gophers, rabbits, badgers, cobbles, boulders, changes in soil moisture content, buried waste, or construction material. He says, any serious geophysicist wouldn't be so definitive in their interpretation of the data, especially considering sensitivity of the survey setting. This geophysicist states, we use our 450 megahertz antennas to scan for voids beneath concrete slabs or to profile ice thickness for ice bridges, and would never consider using these antennae on clay-rich soil sites. If the anomalies being shown in the video are graves, then they are buried less than 30 centimeters in depth. He points out another crucial flaw in their imaging. If you look closely at the depth slice data, you can see distance intervals along the X and Y axis with annotated ticks at 10 centimeter intervals. This means the largest red area anomaly is roughly 10 by 40 centimeters in size, with the remaining anomalies being in the order of 10 by 10 centimeters or 10 by 20 centimeters. He says, I'd be more inclined to interpret these as possibly being related to animal burrows.
And there's thousands of these across the country. Thousands.
Keisha Supernant, Director for the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. It is unclear what sort of consultant fees that she, Terrence Clark, and others have received, but through the investigative report that Blacklock's reporter have uncovered through their Freedom of Information request, it is known that bands across Canada have been using money requested to pay for consultants. The names of these people are redacted. Money that could go towards marginalized Indigenous communities is being diverted towards initiatives that we're seeing here, towards a small group of people in the Aboriginal industry. In Powell River, this omission on the media's part has led to a firm push to rename not only the town, but to also push through name changes of the hospital, the town's university, and the name of the region, without any democratic process being held.
What we're trying to figure out is, in terms of the name changes, that it should be based upon a truthful conception of why it's needed. I don't know how to pronounce that, and it's done in the some kind of script that we're not sure. This is, again, to some extent, an Aboriginal industry type of initiative, because no one knows how to pronounce the name, and why would you have a name that no one can pronounce?
Millions of dollars have gone towards developing this international phonetic alphabet, a script that has nothing to do with the Tla'amin culture. This is money that is diverted away from marginalized Indian communities who are still without necessities like clean drinking water, and is instead diverted to what the public should know is the Aboriginal industry.
Welcome. My traditional name is Yelkamot.
This is Chief Lenora Joe. She claims they have found the burials of 40 children beneath the parking lot of their residential institute in Seashelt.
The GPR identifies 40 unmarked children's graves. Shallow graves. Only large enough for the young bodies to lay in the fetal position.
What appears to be remains of some sort of old drainage pipes, ditched into the ground and paved over to accommodate a parking lot, is being used to accumulate numbers of suspected buried children. The 40 anomalies that Lenora Joe claims are children buried beneath their parking lot were added to this sign shortly after this photo was taken, for a new total of 10,068. Without any scrutiny from news organizations, this sign remains standing in Powell River, a sad reminder of the post-truth era we live in. And not far from Powell River, back in Seashelt underneath the band's parking lot, these anomalies have not been excavated and are presumably still being driven over.
We are still processing, and we are not comfortable disclosing exact locations. Today we share the news with you, and then we turn our focus back to our community. We know there will be many questions.
Questions such as how much money was secured from the federal government, and why, like the Kamloops anomalies, haven't there been excavations as stipulated in these money requests? What or to whom has this money gone to?
Across Canada, nations have conducted investigations, and each time results are shared with the number of children's remains found in the ground. And it started with the 215. For the children we have found, we are going to let them rest right now. This entire process has shaken me to the core. I have cried daily, waiting for the results.
When the public sees signs such as this that are embroiled in controversy and deception, they are being misled and emotionally manipulated into allowing a deceptive narrative to continue.
And therefore, we would expect that the media, the government, all the entities that are responsible for informing people and getting them to make decisions based on proper information are failing with respect to providing the information to people that they need to make democratic decisions.
I think showing and having these graves being brought to light, I think it has a lot of resentment behind it, you know, like it's
Would you be surprised to find that they haven't unearthed any of those graves?
I would be surprised, yeah. I think if that was the case, then there should be a lot more information out there.
Through what we know from Eric Kaufman's report, 60% of the Canadian public believe there are mass graves at the Kamloops Residential School. Through carefully coordinated media messaging, the public, people like Mark, have come to believe falsehoods that are in turn being used to effect significant change in Canada. Should the public not be aware of all the facts of this situation before they make a decision on what they support?
I think it's very interesting information that I'm not personally aware of. You know, I would love to read some more literature if you even have it on you about this. But to make any assumptions on that, I would have to be there to even see them, right? If there was any bodies uncovered, like I don't even know, right? Like it's from what I've gathered is there's a turning of powers happening right now. You know, like it's whereas white people have been in power predominantly for a long time, and the fact that there's finally turning, people have an issue with that, right? So the fact that if there were no bodies uncovered and it's all just made up for publicity, I think that's incredibly shady and immorally a bit upsetting, you know, just for someone that is wanting to believe that justice is being prevailed, you know, it just to be, you know, a cover up or something that is being just shown for no reason, just to add sympathy or empathy on the ends of these families that were traumatized. I think I need to be more educated in order to answer anything that's you know, on the lines of how I feel personally, because I'm clearly not educated enough to.
So we have to be accurate in terms of how we understand the nature of reality. And one thing that I've been watching over the last 4 years is the continued perpetuation of falsehoods with respect to an issue of the Kamloops Indian residential schools. And it started in May 2021 when we heard about the remains of 215 children being found.
This perpetuating of falsehoods is being done by many different people in the Indian communities throughout Canada. One in particular is a man named Ted Gottfriedson, a Thompson River University cultural advisor in Kamloops. 3 years after the claims of 215 children being discovered, he is still putting forth this claim as fact.
And the truth went far beyond anything we could imagine. It hit pretty hard to find those children and to finally really find and show where those children are was a momentous thing for us.
Our government-funded media, such as Global News, is also very responsible for this narrative being pushed forward.
Acknowledging that they're coming from a place of trauma and grief, to Kamloops Teshwetmik Chief Roseanne Casimir gave the first update to the media since news broke of the horrifying apparent find last week.
This is Paul Johnson of Global News you are hearing right now. I worked with Paul on these stories when the announcement of the finds were released. My concerns about the inconclusive nature of the alleged graves went unheeded, and it was made clear to me that that wasn't the angle we were to take.
As far as technical details about what equipment was used, who conducted the search with ground-penetrating radar, and how that data was processed and analyzed, those facts will be released to the public, but not now.
And these findings still have not been released. The information has been kept from the public and will likely never be made clear.
She also called for a public apology from the church.
In the end, what we do want an apology, a public apology.
A struggle session was to take place among the religious community, and with the help of our media, that did occur. However, it wasn't enough.
Truth is at the heart of understanding our past and preventing further damage to the future.
Orwellian language from our former Prime Minister during this pervasively deceptive time in Canadian history.
RCMP and other investigators will be expected to go slow.
Let's remember again that this is potentially a crime scene, but also may well be considered sacred grounds, and people will have views on these that we will need to respect.
Respect and not question for fear of punishment. And with the public's obedience, the winds of international involvement showed hints of moving in.
It's not up to international bodies to choose to come in, although they would be welcome. It is about Indigenous communities having the tools that they need to move forward.
With the tools to move forward being established behind the scenes, the story was being solidified in the minds of the public. And back in Powell River, in the Tla'amin Indian Band, we spoke with a man named Andrew Timothy and discovered a piece of the information that was playing a part in fueling the overall anger in this story.
I've heard stories, pretty bad stories. I've watched documentaries on stuff like that, and I've heard of priests molesting kids, getting them pregnant, and hiding the fact that they impregnated these little girls, and they're 12, 13 years old, having a baby, and there are other kids being told to put the fetus in a shoebox and put it in an incinerator. It's pretty harsh.
What Andrew is referring to is a story made widely known by a film called Sugarcane. In the film, it is insinuated that the story of Indigenous artist Ed Archie Noisecat was a newborn saved from being thrown in a garbage incinerator at St. Joseph's Residential School near Williams Lake.
In the documentary Sugarcane, the story of Father O'Connor and Phyllis Bob and their baby gets conflated with an entirely different story in order to create the infanticide and genocide ashes theme.
The insinuation is that Ed's mother was impregnated by a priest, but both Ed and the filmmakers knew that the father was actually Ray Peters. Peters was married to Ed's mother, Antoinette Archie, and fathered 7 other children with her. As is told in the newspaper article from 1959, it was Ed's mother, Antoinette Archie, who abandoned Ed in a garbage burner. For this, she was arrested and sentenced to 1 year in jail. Another aspect worth scrutinizing is the fact that the film uses the discovered 215 anomalies as a means of driving the film, not lending much credence to the idea of uncovering truths.
So I was gut pulled when I heard about the 215 potential unmarked graves.
The perpetuation of falsehoods has been ingrained in the minds of the public, and in our country there is an eerie inability to discuss it.
It started in May 2021 when we heard about the remains of 215 children being found, and this has continued even though we know that that's not true. There's no evidence of the remains of 215 children being found there, and it's highly improbable. We don't have any records of a parent saying that their child never came home from the residential school.
While Mark may represent the majority, he also represents an important aspect of all Canadians. The hope that unity will prevail. Unity, however, requires a foundation of honesty and of truth.
I want nothing but the whole town just to be happy. You know, like it's there's a lot of resentment and there's a lot of hatred for no reason, just because people live differently.
But that raises the question, how is this related to Powell River? Why would Powell River have an interest in the falsehoods that have been spread about the Kamloops Residential School? And that just shows you the wide tentacles that the announcement about the Kamloops Indian Residential School had. It spawned a whole bunch of initiatives which I believe are very harmful for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And one of those things that announcement spawned was what was called a request, but it actually was a demand that the name of Powell River be changed. And it is important to understand that in a democracy, any decisions that are made must be based on an accurate understanding of reality, and this is the truth. So the Peak we're going to be going to the Peak to talk to hopefully Kelly Keel, who's the publisher, and Paul Galinsky, who is the journalist who covered the Liga Gazan talk. So Liga Gazan came to town on January 20th of this year, talking about residential school denialism, and the Peak covered that and interviewed Gazan. And Gazan's talk, which I listened to a recording of and then summarized it and responded to it, was full of misinformation and ridiculous statements, as I was talking about in the talk last night.
Leah Gazan, an MP for Winnipeg, is responsible for promoting Bill C-413, a bill that aims to amend the Criminal Code of Canada regarding residential school denialism. Residential school denialism is an umbrella term that Gazan and the Aboriginal industry use to categorize any opposition towards a given narrative regarding the Indigenous. The amendment is intended to imprison for up to 2 years any person who publicly criticizes or challenges their position. In other words, if she says there are mass graves across Canada, you must agree.
Since the discovery of the 215 children in unmarked graves in Kamloops, there has been a growing and disturbing rise in anti-Indigenous racism and residential school denialism.
The attempts and language used to control this narrative are becoming more and more desperate as the days pass. A power structure is clawing forward based on subjective experience, absent of objective truth. A philosophy known as relativism in what is now a post-truth era. This is how totalitarian states emerge.
I decided that was the time to introduce Bill C-413, which would prohibit the incitement of hate against Indigenous people through residential school denialism, because it's violent. Denying somebody's genocide, denying somebody's story is violent.
Genocide.
Violent. And I would say I can't think of anything more violent than somebody sharing their story and for somebody to say, you're lying. That is violence. That reminds me that we need to be kind to each other. I know that Pierre Poilievre, OPP, was here last week for his little bro, Aaron Gunn. And I say this as respectfully as he is, with honoring the history of Indigenous peoples, how offensive he is, how he stinks, and I can smell him all the way in Winnipeg with his hate.
This is a complete embarrassment that you have a politician who's making these arguments. That was ridiculous. Leah Gazan said, and I'm going to just quote her, "There is nothing more violent than denying the stories." If an Indigenous residential school survivor said their story, like for example, Billy Coombs, who said that Queen Elizabeth II abducted 10 children from the Kamloops Indian Residential School.
Meet Billy Coombs. As a child, he attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and in his later life began making wild accusations.
Looked like little bodies under white wrappings or white cloth, and put them into the furnace.
Together with a man named Kevin Annette, stories were framed such as Indigenous children being clubbed to death by nuns, hung on meat hooks, and thrown into incinerators. Annette would personally claim that up to 250,000 were buried between church walls across the country. And Billy Coombs, an alcoholic on Vancouver's Skid Row in his later years, was befriended by Kevin Annette, and together birthed one of the more famous stories of Queen Elizabeth abducting children from the Kamloops Residential School.
The Queen came visited for about 3 days, 2-3 days. I don't know how long it was. I think it was about 3 days actually, and a lot of children went missing there.
William Coombs was 12 years old at the time of the royal visit. I was an inmate at the Kamloops school when we were visited, said Coombs. The day the Queen got to the school, I was part of a group of kids that went on a picnic with her and her husband and some of the priests. I remember it was weird because we all had to bend down and kiss her foot, and she was wearing a white lace boot. After a while, I saw the Queen and her husband leave the picnic with 10 children from the school, and those kids never returned. They took away those 10 kids and nobody ever saw them again.
If I said, "You're lying, Billy," she says there's nothing more violent than that. Well, I'm sorry. The death camps in Nazi Germany, the families in Rwanda who were hacked apart with machetes, and on, the death squads in Latin America, that is violent. And for Leah Gazan to be making a comparison like that, she is an absurd person who should not be listened to at all.
The Powell River News Organization, The Peak, chose to deplatform Frances Widdowson by refusing to allow her to advertise her speaking event in their paper. However, they chose to platform Leah Gazan, a woman who holds radical views and espouses hate towards those who challenge her. To find out why, Frances and I headed to The Peak to ask Kelly Keel why she made this decision.
And so what we want to find out is, why would The Peak take this position? And Kelly Keel, who's a publisher, sent Diane Sparks an email saying that The Peak had this policy not to cover misinformation, which I have written out here. Promoting the event for grave error presents a different situation. The event appears to center around the denial of well-documented historical facts regarding the residential schools. And she also talks about atrocities, that the book denies the atrocities. So we're curious to find out why The Peak believes this. Like, have they read grave error? Have they studied the residential schools? What leads them to believe the things that they do? And Kelly Keel, a number of people were commenting that it was terrible that Kelly Keel was being attacked by Conrad Black in his article. But Kelly Keel is not as a private citizen. She's not being attacked as a private citizen. She's being attacked as a publisher who is supposed to be upholding journalistic standards. For a publisher to be engaged in this kind of censorship shows you the serious problems that we're facing as a country, that you can actually have publishers of newspapers who see it as their role to prevent open and honest discussion, the pursuit of truth.
In establishment media, the tool most often used to manipulate and control the public, the most insidious tool, is not the outright lies they peddle. It is the lying by omission that is most effective. It is the mechanism that chains the minds of people. It is Plato's cave manifested. And those who escape these bonds have a mountainous task in revealing the truth to those who still remain in that cave.
Yeah, the secretary ran away up the stairs, and so we're just trying to wait for her to come down. Hi there. I'm Frances Widdowson. I think you're a counselor, city councilor, is that correct?
Yep.
Anyway, we just wanted to talk to Kelly Keel, if she's around.
No, she's not available. She's in a meeting right now.
Okay, or Paul Galinsky?
Does not work works remotely.
Oh, okay.
Barely ever in the office.
So are you aware of the email that Kelly Keel sent to Diane Sparks?
Mm-hmm.
And so, whereby it was stated that the contributors to grave error were promoting misinformation, denying historical atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could explain what the misinformation is.
It's not my email.
Okay, but do you agree with it?
It's not my opinion to agree. I just control the circulation and sell advertising.
The inability of those in media who claim Frances Widdowson is a residential school denier to explain their position when confronted in conversation reveals a lack of honest intellectual substance. This is also apparent from those in public who have protested her presence in Powell River. Could you explain to me your position?
No.
What are your thoughts on free speech and curtailing free speech? Is it not a kind of an ideal of kind of modern society, progressive society?
Yes.
So why do you believe in hindering?
I don't. These people can be here, say what you want, and have an open heart, and listen to others.
Listen to others. Sage advice. The conversation that preceded exemplified the current state of discourse in society. Frances would love to have a conversation with you.
As if.
Are you not interested in what my arguments are?
I know what they are.
Okay, so
And I think that they're.
What are my arguments?
I don't need to speak your work back to you. I'm not in a lecture. I'm not your student. I won't be summarizing your work for you.
No, but do you want to be accurate in the way you're portraying my work? Do you think that being accurate?
You think your work isn't racist?
But you think it is?
Yes.
So why do you think it's racist?
It fully is racist.
But what if you're going to say that my work is racist? Don't you think that you have a responsibility to say why you think it's racist?
Not to you.
So you think that it's appropriate just to make accusations without any evidence?
I mean, there's tons of evidence, but your books are all the evidence I need.
Have you read anything that I've... So
I've read
what have you read?
I've read Grave Error. I've read all your little...
Oh, so you've read my work?
I've read your books.
So,
they're not...
Okay, so you've read Billy Remembers?
No.
That's my work in Grave Error.
I don't know Billy Remembers.
Okay, so you have not read Grave Error?
I've read Grave Error, but I don't know Billy Remembers. And also, I don't care. I don't want to talk about your work anymore. I think it's a bunch of bullshit.
But if you are not able to even...
Lady...
even assert what...
I don't need to assert anything.
But you're claiming you've read Grave Error. You don't even know what's in Grave Error.
Yeah, it's a bunch of BS. I know exactly what's in that book.
But you don't know that my article in there, Billy Remembers.
I don't remember it. I don't remember it.
We need to be kind to each other. We must have an open heart. We must listen to each other. These are slogans we keep hearing. But are these things happening on an equal basis?
You guys have accosted me. You've cornered me with your paid cameraman.
Well, you're coming here with your
I was standing here quietly, and you asked me to speak to this person. I know you're not going to include that in your documentary, but you asked me to speak to her.
Yeah. I will.
You're not. You're going to cut out whatever you want. I know how these things go. I watch television. You're going to make your story. You're going to say it's free speech, and you're going to say I was being so disruptive. Yeah, you guys should go.
We should leave now.
Well, it's been so enlightening, this conversation.
Yeah, it's getting pretty bad. Yeah, you should go. Get.
What is witnessed in those like this woman can be thought of as relativism, nested in the postmodernist ideology that is spreading through academia. It prioritizes subjective experience over objective truth. Postmodernist thought is woven through the entirety of the dynamics at play within the discourse of the Indigenous issue. While this conversation wasn't constructive, It serves as an example of where we are, where Francis stood inside Powell River's news organization, The Peak.
Our position is that the publisher of The Peak has made quite damning criticisms of the book Grave Error, and we're just wondering on what basis she's making those claims.
I can't speak for her.
Okay, so we'll give her a call and see if we can set up an interview. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. If you want to tell the truth, you're interested in the truth, you're interested in evidence-based journalistic practices, which The Peak claims that's what it's about, you wouldn't have people running away and not taking responsibility for the very harsh criticisms that they have made about the contributors of Grave Error. So we think that there is a serious journalistic lapse that has happened with respect to this news organization. And if people are wondering why the public continues to believe that the remains of 215 children have been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, it's because of media organizations like this, which really have no interest in trying to get to the bottom of what is happening with respect to the claims being made about the Kamloops Indian Residential School.
The act of omitting facts on the part of corporate media, including The Peak, has left some in Powell River ignorant of reality. In particular, the demand on the part of the Tla'amin Nation, the town's Indian reserve, putting forth the demand to change Powell River's name on the basis of the alleged atrocities in the Kamloops mass grave story. But what we now know is that that story is just that, a story embroiled in controversy, deception, and personal gain for the few in the Aboriginal industry. On what basis does a reserve have the authority to dictate a significant and costly change to a town's name when their reasoning and frustration is built upon an unstable and crumbling foundation? With establishment media on their side and an ill-informed public, a shift of powers is indeed taking place.
And these are the important policy implications. And there's numerous policy implications because a number of decisions were made in the aftermath of the announcement that happened in May 2021. People in Powell River, and that's how I became introduced to Powell River, is because of the name change process, which is still ongoing. The Kamloops case resulted in John Hackett sending a letter to City Council on June 21st, 2021, claiming that Israel Powell had done terrible things and the town was named after him, therefore the town should no longer be named Powell River. But as well, what prompted him to do it in a more animated fashion at that time was because of the remains of 215 children being found, claimed to have been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And that is specifically mentioned in Hackett's letter. And because of the children that he claimed had been buried in at the Kamloops site, he claimed that genocide had occurred and therefore amends would have to be made and the name change would be part of that.
This information is not widely known in Powell River, especially among the proponents of the name change. The broader picture of this complex issue is not fully understood by some.
Are you sure that you've got like all the info on the name change and like why the name change was requested and like what's going on? I feel like you're trying to draw some parallel lines here to things that don't really line up, things that don't actually work.
Are you aware of the letter that John Hackett sent to the City Council? Basically, that was the formal request for the name change.
John Hackett, the chief of the Tla'amin Nation, shortly after the Kamloops grave announcement, used the alleged discovery of these graves as a reasoning behind the demand for the Powell River name change.
I don't need to talk to you guys anymore. Okay. You are so out of your depth and breadth. You're trying to draw lines in places that they're not, and you're honestly not welcome in this community, but you keep showing up for some reason, so...
Well, we're welcomed by some people.
But lines are being drawn and are beginning to be connected. In Hackett's letter sent to City Council, he states, "In the light of the recent findings of a 215-child grave at the Kamloops Residential School, and more being found daily at other schools, no one can deny the truth any longer that the atrocities our people faced under this appalling colonial policy are real. He goes on to say, "We are extremely concerned with the idea to have a referendum as a means to determine whether the name of Powell River should be changed. A referendum has no place in this process." One other tool being used to leverage this name change is the claim that the town of Powell River was named after Israel Wood Powell, a man in charge of the residential day schools being implemented in the 1800s. As Chief John Hackett states in his demand letter, it must disassociate our homelands with the name of Israel Wood Powell, a man who was instrumental in carrying out the residential school policy. This claim, however, is not backed by reliable evidence and is currently being contested by a local historian in Powell River, a man named Art Richards.
I found a point of land up north that was called Powell Point, and I believe there was a river that was called Powell, but I never found anything that definitely said that this was named after Israel Powell. Most people appear to believe it.
From research done by a man named Rob Tremblay, it has become known that in 1877, explorers mapped the west coast, among them Edward Powell, and preceded by Captain Hamner. It is recorded that Captain Hamner of HMS Daring consistently gave place names honoring Edward Powell, who came before him. With Chief Hackett's claim of Powell River being named after Israel Wood Powell in serious dispute, what else can they have possibly gotten wrong?
Most of the schools that were opened in Israel Powell's time were day schools. He would have liked to have some residential schools because of the results they were getting. They were getting some very fine craftsmen out of those schools and well-educated students. But they didn't have the money and they didn't have the will to have industrial schools all over the province. So although he was in favor of them, I don't believe he started any of them. He's been blamed for starting the Kamloops school, but it was actually the chief of the Kamloops band who started the residential school in Kamloops.
Little Louis, as he was known, was chief from 1852 until his death in 1915. The Kamloops Standard described him as a man of keen intelligence and was very diplomatic in all business connected with the interests of his people. As a young man, Little Louis worked for Hudson Bay Company as guide, trader, and an express rider. His love of horses continued into his old age, where he enjoyed racing and parading, participating in sporting events, and meeting in full equestrian display, visiting dignitaries. He was the wealthiest member of the Kamloops band, owning 30 horses and other livestock. And in 1872, reported by Father Florimond Gendre, Louis raised money to build the church at the Kamloops Reserve, 10 years after he had converted to Roman Catholicism. During these times, Little Louis consistently supported education, assisted in establishing a day school, and encouraged children of the Shuswap to attend. In 1890, he initiated the residential school in Kamloops. At the time, Louis did what he did in hopes of a way forward for his people.
And that was the point where I decided that it wasn't really Israel Powell. This was basically a power struggle. And I think I said so in one of my documents, that Israel Powell was not responsible for a lot of the things that they said he was responsible for. And so I thought that somebody was just trying to gain something by using his name. And that's why I wrote another article. It was called Israel Powell Scapegoat.
Okay. And what do you think that they are trying to gain?
Well, I think maybe it's this was going to be ground zero for a lot of the arguments for what the Aboriginals wanted, or what the Indigenous people wanted. They wanted recognition. They wanted money.
In his letter, Hackett invokes the newly formed power structure. We understand that the city has adopted both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission end the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We are not aware of any actions that have been identified to breathe life into the UNDRIP commitment.
The second very important policy area that people are probably starting to become aware of, and it has a much broader impact on British Columbia specifically, but also on Canada, because in April 2021, there was a lot of opposition federally to turning the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People into a piece of legislation. And I don't know how much people know about the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People and all the legislation that's come out of that. And basically what it says is that all nations have a right to self-determination. Indigenous groups, starting in the 1970s, got it accepted that they were nations and therefore had the right to self-determination, similar to Quebec. But of course, they're not really comparable. Quebec has a population of millions of people, has a legislature, has a judiciary. If Quebec wanted to become its own state, it would be able to do so. That's very different than 633 Indigenous First Nations, which often have 500, 1,000 people, don't have an economic base, don't have the institutions which would be present in what would typically be called nations. But what's happened now is that that declaration has been actually made into law in Canada, in both provincially in British Columbia with what's called DRIPA, and nationally with a United Nations Declaration federally. And the federal one, the federal piece of legislation, actually got implemented June 21st, 2021. That's when it actually became law. And it was resisted in April by the Conservatives and also by a number of provinces. There was a lot of opposition to it because of the nervousness about what is contained within the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And with DRIPA, which I was looking at the Pender Harbor case in British Columbia, where we're beginning to see a little bit about what turning the United Nations Declaration into the rights of Indigenous people into law, into provincial law means.
UNDRIP has solidified into law First Nations' right to dictate the use of Crown land as it applies to the public and corporations. In Pender Harbor, for instance, the public with beachfront property have to now apply for permitting with the First Nations in order to install a dock on the ocean. The fees can be astronomical. Home builders, starting in 2021, now have to pay for archaeological surveys, which can take up to a year or more to happen, delaying building and racking up housing costs in a time of an already existing housing crisis. The public are unaware of this slow creep of authoritarianism. In Powell River, I posed this question to a woman named Josiah. I asked why Indian bands across Canada should be able to accrue this sort of power and control over the public, when this policy change is based off of what can now be estimated as a fraudulent claim of mass graves in Kamloops.
Yeah. I see what you're getting at. I'm just not sure if you're asking the right questions. Like, I think you're on the trail, but I think the questions that we all need to be asking are a little bit deeper than that, than whether that's right or not, because I think that, maybe not, but also like, why not? Well, maybe because are the bands making the best decisions? Maybe not. Is our government making the best decisions over what happens to our crown land? I don't fucking think so. Definitely not. For sure not.
If I was a landowner, yeah, I'm sure I'd be grumpy, but for me to consider being a landowner and worrying about building a dock on my ocean access is so outside of my realm of possibility in my life that it's almost laughable, frankly. It is, again, not something I would ever give a fuck about.
What I witnessed was a short-sightedness, nihilism, and a proclivity to lean towards measures of control that are cloaked in virtuous ideals. As Francis explains, the measures of control, of power, handed to a small group of individuals over a large population will cause an upheaval with potential for wider-reaching consequences. Consequences we are already seeing.
So it's bringing in an ethnic principle into what was a geographical kind of way of thinking about things. And that's not going to be very consistent. That's not going to sit well side by side. And that's what's happening with Pender Harbor.
The band's control over oceanfront property may seem like a trivial issue, as Valentina states, but it goes beyond that. Bands across Canada now have access to funds from stumpage fees in the forestry industry. This money would originally go to the government and be used in maintaining and building infrastructure in Canada, something we all benefit from. Money will be siphoned towards Indian bands, specifically lawyers, consultants, and band administration, on top of the Canadian taxpayer subsidies they already receive. Archaeology fees, ranging from thousands to hundreds of thousands, are being put on the backs of the public and companies in order to simply build homes or develop businesses. UNDRIP has solidified this into law. Democracy is about equal participation and equal accountability. This is about preventing participation and blocking accountability. Will people accept this? Is this the right way to move forward? If we bury democracy, what remains?
My own view is it should be fought against with everything that people have. It's gonna be incredibly divisive.
When speaking with a member of the Tla'amin band, Andrew Timothy, we found a sense of uncertainty, cognitive dissonance regarding the facts of the unmarked graves and their impact on Canada.
Yeah, it'd probably be good to do some excavating and actually prove that they're there. Yeah.
When asked why he thought there were no excavations, despite bands across Canada securing money to do so, Timothy could not see the point in which Canadians are raising objections to.
Maybe bothers them that they're disturbing the dead, and they want to let them rest is part of it, I think. Instead of disturbing the graves and tearing them up and taking them from their resting place.
There is a proclivity among those who have accepted the story to remain entrenched in the idea that Canadians committed the heinous atrocity of genocidal mass graves all across Canada. Disputing this idea is thought of as residential school denialism. As we've seen with Winnipeg MP Leah Gazan, there is a concerted effort to crack down on discussion in regards to this topic.
I don't know, I just wish the people that don't believe it happened would open their mind and actually look into what happened and know what happened and everything like that. I don't know, I kind of call it small-mindedness. Like, they don't want to expand their mind to believe what happened.
The question that Canadians are asking is, how long can this go on for? There are some who believe that we will never see excavations.
It's my feeling that these anomalies, or so-called graves, will never be dug up. Because if they do dig them up and they find there are no graves there, then that really compromises the truth that is being given by the Indigenous people, by the knowledge keepers, by the people who say they saw these things happening, and by politicians and the media. It means that politicians and media didn't do any fact-checking, and all the rest of them are just making things up for a reason. And today we see now that reason is being able to get millions of dollars from the taxpayers, from the people of Canada.
What are your thoughts on how to proceed? We've had now 4 years of listening to claims that don't seem to be based in fact.
Right. Well, I think the grave should be dug up, or at least tested, to see if there are any remains down there. And if there are no remains, then perhaps these millions of dollars should be given back to the taxpayers, for one thing. For another, I think the Indigenous people should admit that they were wrong, that they made a mistake, and then we should get together and talk about how we can move forward from there with truth and honesty and what they really want. Because I don't know what they really want. I see the money going in their direction, but I see nothing else.
There's a famous line in a Shakespearean play which says, "Truth will out," which is that the truth will prevail in the end. Because as a species, it is an understanding of reality, a common understanding of reality, which allows us to progress and create a more cooperative society. So if we can move forward just a certain amount on this contention and agree with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people that we should find out what actually happened at Kamloops, that could be a foundation to build a better future between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
I'm taking it slow, feeding my flame, shoveling the cards of your game, and just in time, in the right place.